Let me begin with something that may sound a little unusual. For a moment, forget about becoming a millionaire. And definitely forget about becoming a billionaire. I know that sounds strange in today's world. If you're in your 20s or early 30s, you probably see it every day. Your phone lights up with another video, another headline, another person claiming they've cracked the code to getting rich, a stock that's about to explode, a side hustle that supposedly makes 6 figures in a year, a strategy that promises financial freedom before you turn 30. It's everywhere. But after spending most of my life watching how money actually works, studying businesses, and observing the habits of people who build wealth slowly over time, I've learned something most of those headlines won't tell you. Wealth rarely begins with something dramatic. It usually begins quietly with a number most people ignore. Today, I want to talk about that number, not $1 million, not 100,000, just $5,000 in savings. Now, if you're a young professional, maybe starting your career, paying rent for your first apartment, managing student loans, trying to keep up with everyday expenses, $5,000 might not sound very impressive. It won't buy you a house. It won't let you quit your job. And it certainly won't make you look wealthy on social media. If anything, someone might even say, $5,000, that's nothing. But after decades of watching how financial lives unfold, I've come to believe that the first $5,000 may be the most important money you will ever save. Not because of what it can purchase, but because of what it changes. Most people think the financial journey begins when you start investing. They imagine the story starts with stocks, portfolios, and market returns. But the real starting point happens much earlier. It happens the moment you begin escaping the financial gravity that keeps most people living paycheck to paycheck. And if you're in the early years of your career, you probably know exactly how strong that gravity can feel. Bills arrive every month. Unexpected expenses appear out of nowhere. And saving even a few $100s can feel like climbing uphill. So if your savings haven't reached that first milestone yet, stay with me. Because today we're not talking about becoming rich overnight. We're talking about the moment when your financial life finally begins to move forward. Now, let me explain why that first $5,000 is so difficult to reach. To understand it, we have to borrow an idea from physics. When a rocket launches into space, the most difficult part of the journey isn't traveling across the stars. It isn't even reaching orbit. The hardest part happens in the first few minutes after liftoff. That's when the rocket has to fight the strongest pull of Earth's gravity. Its engines burn enormous amounts of fuel just to escape the atmosphere. Once it finally breaks free, something interesting happens. The resistance drops dramatically. The rocket can travel thousands of miles using far less energy than it needed during those first few minutes. Your financial life works in a surprisingly similar way. For many young professionals, the phase between zero savings and $5,000 feels exactly like that launch. You're pushing forward, but the gravity pulling you backward is incredibly strong. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. You finally manage to save a few $100s. Then your car needs repairs. Your rent increases, your laptop stops working, or an unexpected medical bill shows up, and suddenly the savings you worked so hard to build disappear almost overnight. It can feel frustrating, almost like you're running on a treadmill that never moves forward. But the truth is, this isn't just bad luck. It's the financial gravity that keeps millions of people stuck near zero. When your savings are extremely small, every problem in life becomes a financial emergency. A $400 expense isn't just inconvenient. It becomes a crisis. That's why reaching the first $5,000 matters so much. It's not just a number in a bank account. It's the moment when small shocks stop knocking you completely off balance. You begin to feel a little breathing room, not wealth, not luxury, just stability. And once that stability appears, something remarkable begins to happen. The same effort that once felt impossible suddenly starts moving you forward, just like a rocket that has finally escaped the heaviest part of gravity. Now let's look a little closer at what life actually feels like when you're living near zero, because many people underestimate how fragile that position really is. When your savings are very small or non-existent, life becomes a series of financial tightropes. You're constantly balancing, hoping nothing unexpected shakes the line beneath your feet. And in your 20s or early 30s, that situation is extremely common. You're building a career, maybe paying rent in a new city, managing student loans, trying to keep up with everyday expenses. On the surface, everything might look fine. You go to work, you pay your bills. You meet friends for dinner once in a while. But beneath that surface, there's a constant pressure, a quiet calculation running in the background of your mind. What happens if something goes wrong? If your car breaks down this month, if your company downsizes, if a medical bill arrives unexpectedly, suddenly the entire system feels unstable. When you're living close to zero, even small problems become amplified. A $500 repair doesn't just cost money, it forces difficult decisions. Do you put it on a credit card? Do you delay another bill? Do you borrow from someone? Over time, these small financial shocks create a pattern that's very difficult to escape, because instead of moving forward, you spend most of your energy simply recovering from the last setback. And there's another cost that people rarely talk about: the mental cost. When money is constantly tight, your attention becomes trapped in short-term survival. You're not thinking about where your life will be in 5 years. You're thinking about how to make it through the next month. And that kind of pressure quietly limits your decisions. It shapes the jobs you accept, the risks you avoid, the opportunities you feel too afraid to take. That's why the first $5,000 is so powerful. It doesn't make you rich, but it begins to remove that constant sense of fragility. For the first time, you're no longer standing on a financial tightrope without a safety net. You're standing on something a little more stable, and that stability changes more than just your bank account. It begins to change the way you think. Now, here's something that often surprises people. The real power of your first $5,000 isn't mathematical. It's psychological. Most people assume money changes your life only when the numbers become large. They imagine confidence appears after a six-figure salary or a large investment portfolio. But in reality, the first meaningful shift happens much earlier. It happens the moment you realize something important. You can actually save money. That may sound simple, but for many young professionals, that realization is incredibly powerful. Before that point, saving can feel almost impossible. Every month seems to end the same way. Your paycheck arrives, bills take their share, and whatever remains slowly disappears through everyday spending. Groceries, gas, subscriptions, small purchases that barely feel noticeable at the moment. Then one day you check your account and wonder where it all went. But when you finally cross that first savings milestone, When your account quietly grows past a few $1,000s, something inside your mind begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is constantly struggling with money. Instead, you begin to see evidence that progress is possible. It's a small change in perspective, but it has enormous consequences. Because once people believe progress is possible, their behavior starts to change. They become more intentional about spending. They begin to notice the difference between what feels good today and what actually helps their future. And most importantly, they start protecting their savings instead of constantly resetting it to zero. Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. The first time you manage to stay balanced for more than a few seconds, something clicks. Suddenly your brain understands that staying upright isn't impossible. It just requires practice and control. Saving your first $5,000 works the same way. It teaches you something many people never fully realize. That financial stability isn't reserved for a small group of lucky individuals. It's something that can be built slowly, deliberately, one decision at a time. And once that realization settles in, the entire game begins to change. There's another reason the first $5,000 matters so much, and it's something people rarely talk about. The moment you reach that number, your relationship with money begins to change in a subtle but powerful way. Up until that point, money usually moves in only one direction, out. Your paycheck arrives, and almost immediately it begins to disappear. Rent takes its share, bills follow, groceries, transportation, subscriptions, small daily spending. Little by little, the entire amount flows away from you. It can feel like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tightly you grip, it slips through your fingers. But when you finally build a few $1,000s in savings, something different starts to happen. For the first time, money isn't only leaving your life, some of it stays. That may sound like a small detail, but psychologically it changes everything. Because the moment money begins to remain in your possession, it starts behaving differently. You begin to see it less as something that must be spent and more as something that can work for you. This is the quiet turning point most people miss. Before this stage, every dollar feels temporary. It's already assigned to rent, food, debt payments, or some other immediate need. But after that first savings cushion appears, your decisions begin to shift. You pause before spending. You think twice about purchases that once felt automatic. Not because you're suddenly restrictive or fearful, but because you've started to value what that money represents: security, flexibility, time. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin making choices that protect that stability. You might cook at home more often, delay an unnecessary upgrade, or think carefully before taking on new debt. None of these decisions feel dramatic in isolation, but together they create something incredibly important: momentum. And once financial momentum begins, the journey towards stability becomes far less exhausting, because now you're no longer fighting gravity alone. You're beginning to move with the current instead of against it. Now, here's where many people make a mistake. Right around the moment when their finances begin to improve, they accidentally reset the entire system. It usually happens in a very predictable way. A promotion arrives, a raise appears in the paycheck. Maybe a new job increases income more than expected. Suddenly there's more money available than before. And the natural instinct is to celebrate that progress by upgrading life: a nicer apartment, a newer car, more dinners out, better gadgets. Individually, none of these things seem unreasonable. After all, you worked hard to earn that raise. But here's the hidden danger. When spending rises at the same speed as income, the financial gravity we talked about earlier never truly disappears. Your lifestyle simply expands to absorb the new money. And before long, you're back in the exact same position you started in. Your paycheck increases, but your savings remain near zero. This pattern is incredibly common, especially for young professionals who are finally seeing their income grow after years of study and early career work. It feels like progress on the surface, but underneath, the foundation hasn't changed, because the real milestone was never the bigger paycheck. The real milestone was building that first layer of financial stability, the $5,000 that protects you from small shocks, the cushion that gives you breathing room. Without that cushion, every improvement in income can quietly disappear through lifestyle inflation. And the cycle continues: earn more, spend more, start over. But people who build lasting financial strength do something slightly different. When their income rises, they allow their lifestyle to grow slowly, not instantly. They protect the gap between what they earn and what they spend. That gap is where stability is built. It's where your future begins to take shape. And once that gap exists, even in a small way, the next stages of financial growth become possible, because money finally has room to accumulate instead of constantly disappearing. Now, once someone avoids the consumption trap we just talked about, something very interesting begins to happen. At first, the change is almost invisible. There's no dramatic moment, no sudden leap in wealth, no headline announcing that your financial life is transformed. Instead, the shift happens quietly. A small gap begins to appear between what you earn and what you spend. In the early stages of your career, that gap might be small, maybe a few $100s a month, but the size of the gap isn't what matters most. What matters is that it exists, because that gap is where financial momentum is born. Think about it this way. When your entire paycheck disappears each month, your financial life is stuck in a loop. Every 30 days, the cycle resets. Earn, spend, start again. But the moment even a small portion of that income begins staying with you, the cycle changes. For the first time, money starts accumulating instead of constantly resetting to zero. And when accumulation begins, progress becomes easier to sustain. That's why the first $5,000 plays such an important role. It's not just protection from emergencies. It's proof that the system can work. Once people see that their savings can grow, even slowly, they begin making decisions that reinforce that progress. They protect the gap. They become more intentional about spending. And gradually, their financial life stops feeling like a constant uphill struggle. Instead, it begins to feel like something that's slowly moving forward, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. And over time, that steady progress becomes far more powerful than any sudden financial breakthrough, because once momentum exists, every additional dollar saved adds a little more weight to the system, a little more stability, a little more control, and that's when the real transformation begins to take shape. So, when people talk about wealth, they often imagine something dramatic: millions in the bank, luxury homes, financial freedom. But the truth is far quieter than that. The real turning point in a financial life rarely begins with a fortune. It begins with stability. For a young professional building a career, the first $5,000 in savings represents something deeper than money. It represents breathing room, the ability to face life without every small problem becoming a crisis. It is the moment when financial gravity begins to weaken. From that point forward, progress no longer feels impossible. Momentum begins to build. Decisions become more intentional, and slowly the gap between earning and spending starts shaping a different future. Not overnight, but step by step. And that quiet beginning is how lasting wealth is built, the kind of wealth patiently practiced by investors like Oracle of Omaha